Hello and welcome to LAYKA Lens, the socially distanced film club organized by Yiddishkayt with the partnership of the Los Angeles Review of Books. I'm Rob Adler Peckerar, Executive Director of Yiddishkayt. Yiddishkayt is an intercultural arts organization founded 25 years ago to preserve, cultivate, and broadcast the treasures of the fusion culture of Yiddish, the diversity of its cultural legacy, and the progressive tradition of Jewish, European, and immigrant life. And for those of you who have been joining us from the very start of the LAYKA series, you know that what this began originally as was a way to engage with the pressing issues of our day through timeless works of cinematic art, using directors and writers, performers with deep ties to the legacy of Jewish culture as it emerged from Central and Eastern Europe as our starting point. And when we were discussing what our next film would be in this series with the Thomas Mann House, we were delighted by their suggestion of this lesser-known film, 1920s SUMURUN by Ernst Lubitsch. And Lubitsch is a particularly interesting filmmaker from our organizational perspective. As the Berlin-born son of a Grodno-born garment merchant, his trajectory to the cinematic pantheon has so much in common with the other figures that have emerged from Jewish communities of Europe who have created lasting works of art in continuous contact with their neighbors. And this film is even more interesting and complex than at first glance, not only because of its particular document of film and theatrical history, but also on account of its inclusion in that great masterpiece of European literature, Der Zauberberg, The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. So I know we have many topics and themes to explore today, so let's get started with the panel for the LAYKA Lens today. First, I'd like to welcome our partner for all things LAYKA, my dear friend, Boris Dralyuk. Boris is the executive editor of the Los Angeles Review of Books, and not only is he a Lubitsch aficionado, he is an award-winning translator and poet. He's taught at UCLA and the University of St. Andrews, Scotland, and his work has appeared in a wide variety of publications, most recently in the New York Review of Books, and his most recent translation is Andrei Kurkov's Gray Bees. Hi there, Boris.
Hello, Robbie.
So next, I'd like to welcome back to the program Deniz Göktürk. Deniz was last with us for the LAYKA Lens this past October for our discussion of Pop's wonderful film Kameradschaft, which you can still watch on the LAYKA website. Deniz is professor of German Studies, Film and Media Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Distinguished scholar, Deniz's focus is on moving images, multilingual literature, theories of migration, social interaction, and aesthetic intervention. And she's the co-editor of the German Cinema book, which was published last year, and it contains many great pieces on transnational connections in German cinema, including a couple of chapters on Lubitsch. Deniz is also the coordinator of Berkeley's Multicultural Germany Project, which is a co-sponsor of our discussion today. So welcome back, Deniz.
Thank you, Robbie. Thanks for having me back.
Sure. And from our partner organization, the Thomas Mann House, I'd like to welcome Nikolai Blaumer. Nikolai earned his doctorate in philosophy at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, and he taught there as well as at the Bauhaus University Weimar. Since 2014, Nikolai has been working for the Goethe Institute's Department of Culture, and he is the co-editor of the book Teilen und Tauschen. And since February of 2018, Nikolai has been here in Los Angeles, where he is program director at the Thomas Mann House. Welcome, Nikolai.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi.
Sure. So let's start with this Thomas Mann connection to the film. So SUMURUN, as I mentioned, makes an appearance in Thomas Mann's 1924 novel, The Magic Mountain, appropriately perhaps in the Totentanz section of the book, which is set during the protagonist's second year at the sanatorium. So it's around 1908. But of course, this film wasn't actually released until 1920. So this film must have made quite a strong impression on the author while he was writing it, so much so that he would reset the film anachronistically into the plot. So Nikolai, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the connection between Thomas Mann and the film.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much again for the kind introduction and for the wonderful collaboration with Yiddishkayt and also with the Los Angeles Review of Books. Boris is really a strong supporter of our house, and we are really grateful for this opportunity here. And when we developed this program, as you mentioned, I would not have thought that we get this great response. And obviously we hit a nerve, and that's really wonderful. Two confessions in the beginning. I'm neither a literary scholar nor a film expert, so consider myself as an avid Thomas Mann reader and a passionate Lubitsch viewer, and I might be able to add a thought or two to this conversation, but I'm first of all eager to learn more from you, Robbie, and Deniz and Boris during our event today. To your two questions, the relation between Thomas Mann and SUMURUN, and then Thomas Mann and Ernst Lubitsch in general. It was at least the second movie that Thomas Mann watched by Ernst Lubitsch. So in his diaries, we found an entry from 1919. He watched Madame du Barry in the Sendlinger Torkino in Munich. In his diaries, he noted, first of all, he praised the actors, Pola Negris, again, the main actress of the film, and he called the film and afterwards doubtfully entertaining. So zweifelhaft unterhaltsam, which might also be true in the case of SUMURUN, the film we want to talk about today. So he revisited the cinema then a year later. And his verdict was quite short and scathing, and he noted he felt quite repulsed and, by the way, tired by the movie. Still, this film experience seemed to have worked in him. So during his work on The Magic Mountain, which was then published 4 years later in 1924, he decided to include it into the Totentanz-Kapitel and the Dance of Death chapter. And this connection has been revealed in the 1980s already. Still, I want to mention that several scholars raised doubts whether that's actually really the connection between the Zauberberg and a film, and Stefan Kepler-Tasaki and others pointed to the fact that Max Reinhardt did not only produce a stage version, a pantomime in 1910, but also a silent movie, a silent film. We don't know whether Thomas Mann saw this Max Reinhardt movie, but it would make sense in a way that the reference is actually not Lubitsch, but Reinhardt, because this production, as I've mentioned, took place before the war in 1910, which is also more appropriate regarding the narration of the Magic Mountain ride, which also plays in the pre-war time. Mm-hmm. So I don't know more about that. I just wanted to mention it. In any case, the discussion of film as a medium fits very well into this period. Thomas Mann called film an immense democratic power. In the 1920s, obviously he was fascinated. I think it's also interesting that in the Magic Mountain, of course, there's a critical distance between Thomas Mann and film, and Mrs. Stör, right? She drinks sweet booze after she sees the movie, but nevertheless, all faces are fascinated and everyone is stunned by the movie. And so we can also read out of the Magic Mountain that also Thomas Mann was impressed, at least by the medium and its potential, even if he had artistic reservations, of course. Mm-hmm. And then on the connection between Thomas Mann and Ernst Lubitsch in more general, I tried to find out when they met first, and I think the first encounter was in 1938 in Los Angeles, when Thomas Mann visited the city as part of his US lecture tour, The Coming Victory of Democracy. And Ernst Lubitsch, Max Reinhardt and others, Karl Lemmler, they invited him to a soiree, and they met there. And then in the upcoming years, Thomas Mann moved then to Los Angeles in 1940, and their relationship was characterized by at least two things. In the early years, both of them were strong supporters of initiative to support refugees from Europe, in particular the European Film Fund, an initiative that was founded by Paul Kroner, Liesl Frank and others, and Thomas Mann and Ernst Lubitsch, both of them were regular donors and also public supporters of this initiative. And then later on, Lubitsch died in 1947. I think it's fair to say that they developed quite an intense, good friendship. There are dozens of entries in the diaries about invitations to Bel Air, to the home of Lubitsch, and to Pacific Palisades, to the Mann family's home. And also Zaika Viertel, the screenwriter in Santa Monica, was an important figure who brought them together in her Sunday gatherings at her house. But of course, all of that took place much after SUMURUN and also the Magic Mountain. So we might come back to that later on in our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. I mean, and it's interesting that I also remember hearing that the Magic Mountain, that there was potentially going to be a filming of that here in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. Is that something that that Thomas Mann was behind the initiative for, or?
At least there was an attempt for production of the Joseph novels. Then the Odyssey, also none of those projects were successful. Also in the 1920s, he wrote a script, Thomas Mann, on Tristan and Isolde, and a film adaptation. So there were several projects to realize Mann's novels as films, and he was also engaged as a screenwriter. But as far as I'm aware, the first production on a Thomas Mann piece was then Lotte in Weimar, So Many Beloved Returns, in the 1950s, and everything else was without any success.
I mean, one of the incredible things I think about it, the appearance of it in the Magic Mountain, whether or not it's the Reinhardt initial production of it, of the filming of the pantomime, or the Lubitsch the Lubitsch film of it, is just the way that it in fact, in a certain level, it doesn't matter whether it's the Lubitsch or the Reinhardt film, because there are all these anachronistic strands of thematics that run through Magic Mountain. It's very clearly written in retrospect from a later standpoint. In fact, the kind of what we started with at the beginning of this clip, that recording of Lindenbaum, which is referenced also in the novel, is a recording, the popular recording of that, the gramophone recording of it, which is portrayed in the novel as well, and then also is what Hans Castorp is singing at the very end of the book, is also a kind of a back projection of a resetting anachronistically of a popular work. I mean, of course, the music was already recorded and sung, but then the version that's referenced in the novel is also reset back into it. And I think that takes us to this kind of complicated idea of Magic Mountain, because the Magic Mountain is understood as a Zeitroman, a novel that is a reflection of its own time. But there's a play with that very concept, I think, in the idea, the construction of the Magic Mountain, which is that it's not only a reflection of its time, in that it's a novel about that period of a diseased Europe leading up to the First World War, but it's also a reflection, obviously, on the nature of time itself. And I'm wondering about all of these thematic threads that are woven in the novel, including music and film and photography, which all play a major role in it. I'm wondering, maybe Deniz, if you could talk to us a little bit about, what might be the motivating choice for Mann to choose a film like SUMURUN to make an appearance in a work that's so characteristic of its period, like the Zauberberg.
Yeah, as you say, Robbie, so it is, Thomas Mann himself called it a Zeitroman in a lecture at Princeton in 1939, and a novel about time in those two senses, that it is depicting a lost epoch, a kind of disappearing bourgeois European society, pre-war Europe in retrospect, but it's also about time itself, the experience of the passage of time in the light of death, disease, and destruction. So it's not surprising that the movies would make an appearance in this novel, because, of course, all literature written in the 20th century somehow needs to be read in correspondence with moving pictures. And moving pictures introduced a modern, technologically mediated experience of space and time. And the whole debate around cinema, sort of centered around this radically new form of storytelling. So in this passage, I know you pre-circulated the quote from the novel that is about that visit to the movie theater, the Bioscope theater. So where, the movie is described as this rousing tale of love and murder in the court of an Oriental despot, and so on. And, the kind of fast, speedy progression of these opulent scenes and so on. So it then goes on to talk about, the experience of watching those moving pictures as phantoms. And the quote is, "They had watched only phantoms whose deeds had been reduced to 1,000,000 photographs brought into focus for the briefest of moments, so that as often as one liked, they could then be given back to the element of time as a series of blinking flashes. Once the illusion was over, there was something repulsive about the crowd's nerveless silence." So there is, this visit to the movie theater is, allows for a reflection of the mediation of time, and that is a key theme in this novel. How is history told? How can it be told? And also, how does one deal with this whole competition for attention that is introduced with the new visual media? So, the whole writers reflecting on the aesthetic possibilities and social consequences of the cinematic turn, the competition, and the negotiation of cultural hierarchies, taste, morality, were fiercely debated at the time, as documented in the Kinodebatte and the promise of cinema. So I kind of read it as a reflection on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if first, I just wanted to note that if you have a chance, if for our audience, if you haven't had a chance to read The Magic Mountain or reread The Magic Mountain, maybe you don't have the time or energy, or as we say in Yiddish, the Sitzfleisch for that kind of reading. We have excerpted that whole passage that is about that reflects on this film on our website. If you wanted to go to that, there is a link that is provided for you in the chat here for anyone who wants to read both in German and in English the original of that. And I'm wondering, actually, Deniz, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the Kinodebatte, what that was, especially considering the time period that Magic Mountain comes out and the reflection on this. If you could just share a little bit more about what that entailed, what that is about.
I mean, it's basically what I was already hinting at, that the writers of the time were kind of all fiercely debating this new medium in terms of its aesthetic possibilities, its audience outreach, and also its social consequences. And so there have been extensive collections published on this debate. First and foremost, The Promise of Cinema, it's interesting because the writers at the same, they were fascinated, but at the same time also repelled, as we've already heard. So they I mean, of course, this was also a new source of income potentially, film contracts. Very early on, Autorenfilm, auteur cinema was already coined as a term, and the work of literary authors was brought to the screen. But at the same time, of course, there was a sort of unease about the the pace, and the kind of, you know, the flickering shadows, those phantoms that you know, were very much in conflict with the temporal design of a novel. I mean, here we have an author writing you know, over 1,000 pages and really kind of going into minute detail and capturing that whole you know, in the attempt to capture the time. And of course he believed in the superiority of literary narration. But there is this awareness of fundamental changes in perception. And in this quote also, sort of further on, then there is, you know, he doesn't just write about SUMURUN. He doesn't, you know, name the film, but, you know, he alludes to it. You know, the description could fit many other Orientalist adventure dramas of the time, but he also then goes into a description of the newsreel.
Right.
Right. So he's writing. They now saw pictures from all over the world. The top-hatted president of the French Republic, reviewing a long cordon, then sitting in his landau to reply to a welcoming speech. The Viceroy of India at the wedding of a Raja, the German Crown Prince on a barracks drill field in Potsdam. They observed the life and customs of an Aboriginal village on New Mecklenburg, a cockfight on Borneo, naked savages blowing on nose flutes, the capture of wild elephants, a ceremony at the Siamese court, a street of brothels in Japan with geishas sitting caged behind wooden lattices. They watched some Samoyed bundled in furs driving sleds pulled by reindeer across the snowy wastes of northern Asia, Russian pilgrims praying in Hebron, a Persian criminal being bastinadoed. They were present at each event. Space was negated, time turned back, then and there, transformed by music into a skittering phantasmagoric here and now. So this kind of you know, really illustrates how the movies brought the world to the world. You know, put places on the move, simulated time, and that was, of course, of highly attractive to the writer. But at the same time, he's kind of course, negotiating his own craft of capturing time. Yeah.
And it's also really interesting. I mean, all of that's there, plus this other element where he actually, I think Hans Castorp actually references the fact that while he's watching this film, he's even thinking about the debates about humanism and authoritarianism and the decline of the West versus the conflict.
Did we lose?
Just for a second, I think we
did. If we should just turn to the film for a second, just to see the way that this actually plays out. So let's take a look. So first, I would just like to take a moment to thank Burkhard Goetze from the Metropolis Film Orchestra for sending us along that newly reconstructed original score, which was featured in this clip, as well as all of the fans of silent film scores, Robert Horta, other people who have sent us so much information about the original score for this, which maybe we can return to in a little bit. But first, since we were left here in the end of that clip with the image of Lubitsch here as our sort of sad clown, Canio, Pagliaccio, and hero. I'm wondering if we could turn to Boris for a second. What do you make of this image, this figure of Lubitsch here in his final performance as an actor?
Well, it's a fascinating question. I think what it brings up for me is Lubitsch's great love for theatricality and for performativity, which is, of course, splattered across this entire film. All of the roles are so rich and so doubled in some ways. Everyone is performing on top of what it is that they're meant to be performing. And I think this is something that runs like a thread through Lubitsch's entire career. It's a fascination one might expect from an actor turned director. There's a kind of Shakespearean love for the play within a play, which develops all through his career, which is all of his films feature, if not actors, then con artists, liars and deceivers, and people who don't know that they're in love with someone with whom they're in love. So there's a great deal, balls and balls of self-deception and performativity that we see in all of his films. That kind of irony, I think, is what makes Lubitsch so special. It's that gift for nuance, the gift for duality. And to go back to something that we brought up earlier, the shock that a film like this might present for a novice film viewer. For us watching this film, which is full of masterful cuts and is rather fast-paced, it doesn't strike us at all as out of the ordinary. In fact, it flows very smoothly. It's what one might call a proper Hollywood picture, although it wasn't a Hollywood picture, but it was a kind of showpiece to demonstrate that Lubitsch could do what Hollywood was doing. When we think of the context in Hollywood at the time, the Sheik is coming out in 1921. There are scenes here which brought to mind some Griffith pictures. I see one of the comments in the comment section poses a question about D.W. Griffith, whether Lubitsch was familiar with Griffith's films. Well, the very first clip that we saw with SUMURUN running circles away from the aggressor, from the tyrant, from the Sheik, well, that immediately brought to mind Broken Blossoms, which is another problematic Orientalist picture, a Griffith picture from 1919. So there is so much Hollywood in this non-Hollywood picture that it makes total sense that he would make the transition, a year later.
It's just, and I wonder, this film, in fact, I guess a lot of the early Lubitsch films are dismissed by, Lotte Eisner famously calls the group of the early silents too Jewish slapstick. This film in particular is dismissed by Krakauer. And I'm wondering also, actually, even Nikolai Lubitsch, who I hope is with us in our audience today, in her message to us prior to our screening, noted even how this film is not even doesn't feel representative of her father's work. I'm wondering, how do you feel like this fits into the Lubitsch overall, both in the period of the silence and later? If we're talking about the famous Lubitsch touch, does this film even have it?
I think it does. I think it has a very sophisticated treatment of sexuality, which is, I think, a part and parcel of the Lubitsch touch. When we think of the gender roles of just about everyone in this picture and the gender relationships, and the fact that the whole plot is motivated by desire, I think that's very much a part of Lubitsch's core concerns, and something that we still associate with him to the day. The sophistication of his pictures from the early 30s made them basically unwatchable, officially unwatchable for decades. And I think here we have the same thing. The way that the subtlety, I can say, with which the eunuchs are depicted is, I think, rather unique and extraordinary for the time. The relationship between the women and the eunuchs, the relationship between the women themselves, the agency that is given to these women who are slaves, is fairly extraordinary. And the other thing that this film has that I associate with Lubitsch touch is a belief in the power of art, in this case performing arts, that it's the artists who win the day, even if not totally, but artists in defense of love win the day. That's the Lubitsch touch.
Right. At least Lubitsch, as the actor who saves the day, if not the dancer who doesn't make it through the final piece of it. Now, I understand though that I mean, one of the interesting things that you mentioned is just that the whole setup here. The one of the interesting things, I also think that one of the interesting Lubitsch touches of this is the transformation of the pantomime, the original pantomime, the Reinhardt pantomime, into this film. That there's something much more sophisticated and also funny. I think the humor of it is brought out tremendously in the Lubitsch film, where my sense of reading the reviews of the original pantomime. In fact, we posted one, I think, on our Facebook page from Life magazine from 1912, when it was touring the world, talked about how melodramatic and gloomy the overall piece was. And I don't feel like we have the same sense of gloom at all from in this piece. In fact, there's a lot of humor, a lot of very typical. I mean, not only the pratfalls, which are, tremendously funny, and the use of Lubitsch's body as a prop in a bag throughout the film does not take place in the same way in the pantomime. But I'm interested in this relationship between the pantomime as it's transformed here. Nikolai mentioned that potentially even the reference in the book might even be to the original filming of the pantomime. And of course, there's also this involvement with Lubitsch himself as part of the Max Reinhardt troupe and the pantomime. In fact, Lubitsch took over the role of the Hunchback Clown from Rudolf Schildkraut in the original production. And he's a figure who also, at Yiddishkayt, is a central person in the Yiddish theater of the United States. And so I'm interested in understanding a little bit about the role of the Reinhardt theater in particular, this group of actors, this whole ensemble with this production and with Lubitsch in general. If anyone wants to, maybe Deniz can speak to a little bit about the relation between Reinhardt and this film.
Well, I'll pick up on your question also about Ernst Lubitsch's self-casting in this film and the role he plays. So he joined the Max Reinhardt Deutsches Theater group as early as 1911, so coming out of this family business of tailor. He had no interest in working as an accountant for the family business. He went into acting, and he the same year, 1911, actually, the ensemble staged their first production of Friedrich Frexka's pantomime, SUMURUN, and it was enormously popular. It also went on tour to New York, and Lubitsch was in it from that first production as in a supporting role, and he stayed with the theater until 1918, and also gradually started acting in films. He acted in approximately 30 films as an actor between 1912 and 20. That when in 22, then he moved to Hollywood. But so as an actor, he is memorable for his play with ethnicity, transgressive gender roles, class status. So those are his trademarks. In Meyer from Berlin in 1919, plays this Sally Meyer in lederhosen and a Tyrolean hat as a sort of parody of a mountain film before the term existed. And so in a way, I think it is highly significant that he cast himself this is his last acting role in any movie, and he casts himself as this hunchback. There's resonances also with the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and his infatuation with the dancer. But so it's a sort of self-ironic presentation of the performer and his tragedy also, and but also as a sort of moving force who actually eliminates the despotic ruler in the end. So I think this film is about acting. It's about, and in some ways it's very similar to Be or Not to Be, which is also about the theater troupe performing a play in these times of resistance against occupation. But this too is about performance, and these traveling performers get a lot of screen time in this movie. There are 2 long sequences. We just saw part of one. And then there's another one where they are actually performing, Pola Negri, and so it is, like Lubitsch said about To Be or Not to Be when he was attacked for bad taste in 1942. He said actors will be actors no matter what, and this one too is about actors. And cinema as a site of make-believe, Sein und Schein, acting and staging, role play and performance. And it's a whole kind of complex economy of different shades of difference that gets set into motion here, occupying different positions and playing different roles. In the entertainment industry, already back in old Europe, before coming to Hollywood, So I'd like to say something about the black actors, but that can wait too.
But maybe let's return to the casting of the. I just want to pick up on one aspect of this thing that you just said that I found to be really striking in terms of the reference between To Be or Not to Be and this film, which is the role of art in the face of despotism or authoritarianism, which is certainly a theme of this film, and then is drawn out much more in depth in much more real terms, or material terms, in To Be or Not to Be later. And one of the things that I think I'm interested in hearing, maybe the 3 of you kind of talk about it, is just a little bit about what is the role of oppressed people in this battle against despotism, and as we see it in this film. It's certainly a major theme in the film, and in a way the film might make it a little bit, and maybe that is part of the Lubitsch way of taking this heavy subject and deflating it to a certain extent, or of treating that kind of the seriousness versus the lightness being juxtaposed with one another of the film. And I'm wondering what you all think about this idea that we see in this, because it also is resonated in the novel, right? This idea about desire versus despotism in the film. And I'm wondering what you all think about that thread of it before we'll turn to the actual actors and the physicality of the film itself.
I mean, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say that there are Russian connections that occurred to me throughout the film. One direct Russian connection is the scene in which the old sheikh murders his son reminded me very much of one of Russia's most famous paintings, which is the Ilya Repin's painting of Ivan the Terrible killing his son under much the same circumstances. And that painting, of course, if any of you look it up, it's easy to find, is sheer horror. Whereas this is played not so much for laughs. It's still very affecting emotionally. It's melodramatic, but there is, again, a certain kind of lightness that's infused in the scene. Partly it's the fact that we have Lubitsch himself witnessing the crime, and that the gentleness with which he then treats his great love. raises the scene above the kind of the abject horror that I see in the Russian painting. The other thing, the other Russian connection is a short story by Vladimir Nabokov, in which art has virtually no role to play in bringing down tyrants, except through the vehicle of laughter. That what art can do, what imagination can do, is it can reduce tyrants to their proper size. They are the midgets among men, not the people who are usually seen as smaller than. So that's something that we find here. It's the smallest, most marginalized figure that reduces the gigantic, rather ridiculous tyrant to size. And the same can be said in the performances in To Be or Not to Be. Ridicule is a weapon that art can use, but also art is escapism, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially in moments when we need escape most. So there's a kind of dual defense of art. Art can be a true weapon, but it can also be a vital form of escape.
Yeah, Deniz, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, Desire versus Despotism is a quote from Rick McCormick, who has written a good piece on this film. And so, I mean, I think he is trying to defend the film against Krakauer and Eisner. And also, I mean, clearly it's not really a political film, but he's trying to tease out the politics. And one important element is the role of women in this movie. I mean, so there is this alliance between the kind of the traveling performers, but also the women in the harem who ultimately sort of prevail. So and interestingly, there is almost there is that solidarity in the harem. So I've recently been watching some of the Turkish series Magnificent Century on the Ottoman court and all this harem intrigue where they are poisoning each other and all that. So no more authentic than what we are seeing here, but there, in Lubitsch, the women all bond together and they're supporting each other, and true love wins in the end. So there is that, but and this kind of the victory of the little guy is something that he often kind of performs in his comedies.
Please.
If we could come back to the question of actors briefly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I first encountered Lubitsch actually as a sculpture in a cinema in Berlin, Schöneberg, there on in Kino Notausgang with as a wooden sculpture, were illuminated by a spotlight, big cigar in his mouth, and holding up a small hand puppet of himself, a small depiction of himself with his right hand. And this figure already captured that whole self-ironic presentation and ventriloquism that the director's self-reflexive humor. It's actually now in a different theater in Kino Babylon in Mitte, sculptures by Jürgen Walter. But so that is very key to his to this role he plays in this movie. But I've been also thinking about the other actors, and prominent in that clip we showed is the dance of the a black black actor on the marketplace, who is actually not a part of the troupe, but he is, he's just there all of a sudden. He belongs to that place. So then I got curious and started, looking in the credits, and there are several other Black extras throughout the film. The servants and various, and they're all uncredited. So they're and I'm drawing here on Tobias Nagel's work on actors of African descent on the German screen, which were actually a continuous present from even pre-Weimar to Weimar, and then through Nazi cinema into the 1950s. And they were, of course, in stereotypical roles as slaves, servants, or wild natives. And ultimately write fantasies and projections in this colonial regime of visual representation. They were not perceived as actors. I mean, they were paid by the studios, but they were not perceived as actors, but as authentic embodiments of nature. Hence, they remained nameless and not credited. And this particular, so Tobias Nagel actually helped me to identify this dancing actor. That's Louis Brody, born in 1892 in Cameroon, which was a German colony at the time. And he died in Berlin in 1951 and was in 50 plus film roles, and including films by Fritz Lang and Joe Mai and others, mostly exotic roles. And he was one of the most well-known and sought after Black actors at the time. Also politically active in the African Aid Association, stood up for fair pay and contracts and so on. But this was, of course, the time when natives from elsewhere were still put on display in the zoo. So there was this whole nexus between the zoo, the ethnographic museum, and cinema as a sphere of staging the exotic other. So to come back to that point I was trying to make, yet that there was a sort of attention economy with different shades of difference, where people were occupying different positions, and so the role play was probably more accessible to the successful Jew coming out of the Max Reinhardt ensemble than the colonial subject, Louis Brody.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And it's also really fascinating just thinking about the position, the idea of exoticism in this film overall, the idea of the exotic East, but it also and then encompasses the both German colonization, but also so it's part of this imagination of Africa and the East altogether, and it's all sort of collapsed in this one film, where all of these kinds of pieces, which also reflects back on that very piece that you were reading to us from the Magic Mountain, where there's a juxtaposition between the film itself and its exotification, and this and the very classical forms of Orientalism, and then the way that it cuts to the actuality, the news clip of seeing the world broken up into all these pieces. It's a very early idea about globalization, or about the way that we screen the globe. It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm interested very much into this idea about this exchange of images too, of people from East and West, and before we turn to I see that we have some questions, but I'm wondering about just how do we address, especially retrospectively, the questions of what it means to screen the Orient, the East, in this particular way in this film, and to see, and also the ideas of difference and exoticism that come up in this film. How do we look at this today, and what do we understand about the context in which it was made? And I'm wondering what any of you think about that.
Well, it makes us cringe a little bit, of course. or
Yeah.
I cannot watch this without thinking about Edward Said's famous book about Orientalism, and how the kind of the discursive power of these kinds of representations. And he actually, in that book, quotes Abbé Le Masquier's description de l'Égypte from 1735, I think, where sort of the Orient figures as a sphere of bizarre jouissance, and then the Orient in the Western imagination becomes a living tableau of queerness, of excessive sensuality, and violence and despotism, and so this film actually sort of unabashedly stages all of those cliches, although sort of the role of the women is kind of interesting, the kind of take on that, but it kind of really has no problem with kind of exhibiting all the Orient as a sort of phantasmagoria, as a spectacle. Of course, it's not a historic figure, so it's not Madame du Barry. So you can't really get it for historical inaccuracy. But so there are kind of course ways in which this kind of imagination of the Oriental has had detrimental effects on sort of colonizing our imagination. So
yeah. Boris, I think were you about to say something too? I think I cut you off maybe.
No. I think Deniz has said it all. Yeah.
One of the things that I think keeps coming up also in the comments that I've noted is the relation not only to kind of this the way that Orientalism plays its part in the depictions on screen and on stage, but also it points at these relations between the arts. We had a comment that referenced the Ballet Russe as having a potential influence. Here is the comment from Anthony Russell on this film, also from the period that it was made, and a handful of other comments about other works that reference either the East or the way that these kinds of stories are told in different media. I saw a comment that had come up before about works of opera, and I think the opera was one of the main ones that I was thinking of when I was mentioning the Pagliacci connection to our character Canio, but also there's kind of a visual reference to Carmen that comes up in this. So there's this relationship between the way that Eastern and spaces of spectacle are played on these to become this form of travel by proxy, by screen and by stage. I'm wondering what you what we can say to this relationship that is starting to develop across the art, these conversations that are happening from this early Lubitsch piece across all of these different works of art and different media.
Yes, I think there was an interest, to talk about the Ballet Russe, for instance, there was an interest in, by the people behind the Ballet Russe to make use of authentic folk materials from both their own culture, what they perceived as their own culture, and other cultures. It was part of modernism's fascination with primitivism. And for better or for worse, these cultures provided a perfect visual elements for largely visual art. This is we find it in painting, we find it in film much more readily than and used with much greater abandon than we sometimes find it in text. And so it was this global grab bag that had just been opened, and you see the glee with which filmmakers and choreographers are making use of it.
Yes, I see that there's also a comment here from my own father who mentions this idea about the no theater as being potentially like this very gesture-based performance. This, like you're saying, Boris, this global grab bag of tropes and ideas and that come from it. We have other comments here that are referencing ideas about the. Well, here we have a comment. I think it has a rather Shakespearean quality. The places like Bohemia, Illyria were just romantic escapist names, and this wasn't taken to be realism. Very interesting point. Yes, sorry.
I will say that the Shakespearean connection is I think very striking. All of the tropes of Elizabethan drama are here. The people playing dead, the troupe of actors, the love between the subaltern and the tyrant. All of this is here.
To be or not to be.
Yes, exactly. To be or not to be.
Right. And we have a question here that sort of takes us back to the beginning point. Someone asked that they may have missed it, but why was this particular film chosen as a part of the Leica series? So I gave a little bit about the connection between us and what we had talked about with the Thomas Mann House early on, and also the relationship, of course, between Ernst Lubitsch and our particular lens, which takes as a starting point looking at the works of those performers, actors, filmmakers who emerge from an Eastern and Central European film background, and the way that these converse across works of cinema. It's interesting. I was just noticing that we were about to do a profile on our own website about the actor Avram Morevsky on our website, who is a part of the Vilna troupe, and is actually the cousin to Ernst Lubitsch. They are cousins, and Morevsky was part of the Vilna troupe, and through his connection with Ernst Lubitsch became an actor in a film, Das Alte Gesetz, where he plays a role. So there are these interesting intersections between all of these figures who emerge very specifically from what we might sometimes think of as being this kind of niche cultural background, but there are in fact these deep intercultural connections between these figures. And one of the things I just wanted to turn to, because we're just running out of time, is that one of the things that I noticed is that about a year ago we had this article that came out in the New Yorker about that takes us back to the Thomas Mann House, the haunted California idol of German writers in exile. And I'm wondering, maybe we just turn to Nikolai for a second. There does seem to be a return resonance, I think, to link back a little bit to what we were just talking about in terms of the relationship between artists who are working against despotism, who go to exile, and then this article that appeared last year. And I'm wondering if you see a certain type of cultural resonance of writers in exile, particularly the ones we see who ended up here in Southern California and the particular milieu that they operated in here, including Lubitsch and including Mann.
Sure. I mean, a lot of the filmmakers we mentioned today fought their own fight against fascism in the 1940s, right? And I guess it's fair to say that in recent years, a lot of people, including me, have the impression that there's something at stake politically at the moment. It might not be legitimate to compare the fight that Jewish and other German emigres in California fought against German fascism, but nevertheless there's certain autocratic tendencies in both of our countries, and in a way people like Lubitsch and also Thomas Mann are, I think, role models today. And also, I mean, if you see Thomas Mann, how he converted from this kind of conservative aestheticism that he kept until the beginning of the 20s towards a very engaged Democrat and a public intellectual, and his active role through his BBC talks and so on. I think that's still very inspiring. And to other reasons, maybe might be fine to mention that Thomas Mann House and the acquisition by the German government also played a role for this more active discourse, or this more active remembrance on the German emigres. And then there are a couple of books like Donna Rifkin's The Sun and Her Stars, published last year, who remembers like a Viertel, and that had an enormous impact, of course. Alex Ross's books on recent one on Wagnerism, and Thomas Mann and the whole emigre community plays a role. And then also Tobias Bös, Thomas Mann's War. So all those publications, of course, also helped to foster this remembrance on the German emigre culture. And I guess it will be inspiring also in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note about ending on that note about this anti-fascist tendency, especially the anti-authoritarian piece of this, since we've run out of time for this discussion, I hope you'll all continue to come back to more LAYKA Lens events. In fact, our next film that we're screening is specifically an anti-fascist film. We will be returning again on May 13th with Jay Hoberman and Farron Nimi, who will join us in a discussion about Michael Curti's anti-fascist adaptation of Jack London with the film The Sea Wolf, starring Edward G. Robinson, John Garfield, and Ida Lupino. So please check out our social media platforms, or if you want to be on our list and find out more about upcoming LAYKA events, you can write to LAYKA, L-A-Y-K-A, at Yiddishkayt.org to make sure that you're on our list. Thank you all so much for this incredible discussion. It was really fascinating, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the comments and questions, but they'll all be preserved for posterity on the Facebook chat and on the YouTube chat, and you can always refer back to it on the video, which we will archive all on the LAYKA Lens website. And again, if you do enjoy these programs, please consider visiting the Yiddishkayt website to support events like this. And thank you so much to the LA Review of Books and the Thomas Mann House and Benno Hertz there and everybody who had a hand in this discussion. And a deep thanks to our Yiddishkayt team behind the scenes, Lisa Kenner-Grissom and Claire Fester, who truly make all of these LAYKA events possible. Thank you all for being here today, and from all of us, take care. Thank you very much.